Welcome to the Reinvention Collaborative's Town Hall on Academic Honor and Integrity, Challenges and Opportunities. I'm Liz Bennett, Assistant Director of the Reinvention Collaborative, a national consortium of more than 80 research universities dedicated to strengthening undergraduate education. We're joined today by three leaders in academic integrity. Dr. Camilla Roberts, Director of the Honor and Integrity System at Kansas State University and President of the International Center for Academic Integrity. Dr. James Orr, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Strategic Enrollment at the University of Memphis and Treasurer for the International Center for Academic Integrity. And Dr. Joseph Brown, Director of the Academic Integrity Program at Colorado State University and member of the Content Committee for the International Center for Academic Integrity. Thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We'll be recording this webinar and posting the captioned recording with slides on our website. We'll send a notification email out when the recording is available. Please feel free to share this with any colleagues who might be interested in viewing it, especially if they weren't able to make it today. We'll be utilizing the Q&A function for the question and answer session in about the last 20 minutes. Feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation, and then our presenters will reserve time at the end to address those. Sorry, my Chihuahua decided to make an appearance. We'll also have the chat enabled today. And with that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed guests.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're viewing this. Joseph, James, and I are very happy to be with you today. And concerns of academic integrity have definitely been heightened since the onset of the pandemic. And so we want to spend some time with you today discussing that broad picture, the challenges and the opportunities of academic integrity on the campus. Next slide, please. All right, we will tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today and our time with you. We're going to begin with a brief explanation of the students with whom we work and examine the call from the International Center for Academic Integrity to create what we would call a culture of academic integrity. We're then going to shift a little bit to examine the faculty perspective and what they need to know or should know to manage academic integrity. And lastly, we'll discuss the ways administrators can support and lead the university in a positive direction of academic integrity. Next. So when it comes down to it, students really are the reason why any of us are here. If we didn't have the student population, we wouldn't have institutions of higher education. So therefore, it is really imperative that we attempt to understand who they are and where they are in development. Baxter Magolda actually said that the traditional age college students are really trying to attempt to create their own self-authorship, which is the capacity to internally define their own beliefs, identity, and relationships. And you can probably think back to the time when you were in college, you were trying to figure out exactly who you were as well. For years, our students have followed the rules, regulations, or expectations from their families. And now in college, they're attempting to create their own identity. Keegan argues that putting pressure on students in the classroom or putting them over their head can be very beneficial in the academic sense as they strive to critically think about how to solve problems when they might not have known exactly what to do when they first received that problem. They had to think over their heads. However, we're asking them to think critically about their assignments, about ethics, about government. We're asking them to do that within our society, but at the same time, we're also we're asking them to follow a set of rules and regulations, such as the code of conduct. So in essence, we're wanting them to take one thing at face value with no questions or comments, and another part, and a pretty large part of their university experience, we want them to critically analyze their surroundings. Next slide. So along with the confusion of critically thinking about some things and not about other things, students are constantly having new ideas and new perspectives shown to them. This can be a very stressful time period for them. If we don't know exactly what direction a person's going or where we're going, it can lead to that stress. And Taylor does say that this dissonance is necessary for progress, that if you're confused about which way to go, you're going to rise above it and you're going to be better afterwards. However, Ignacy makes a very valid point that for many students, these new perspectives, when they're brought forth, it's just too much for them. It's too much stress. and they don't see a connection with their meaning making, then they'll discount it. So if they're thinking one way and their friend comes and tells them a new way of doing things, well, they have a choice to make. And in many cases, if it's not matching what they've had in the past, then they won't go that direction. So as many institutions have a student learning outcome develop something around the ability for students to make ethical and moral decisions, we all know that students are continuing to develop these skills while they're at our institutions. However, for many, our students are remaining what Kohlberg and Hirsch call the conventional level of moral decision making. And so when they're in that area of moral decision making, that's when students simply follow the expectations of their social situation or their peer pressure. And this is key of why having a culture of academic integrity be their social situation is so important. Because if their social situation is following the rules, is following the regulations, are making good ethical and moral decisions, then they will follow that path as well. Next slide. So after understanding a little bit about the basic development, it's really important to look at exactly why and what the research says about why students might even cheat in the first place. We know our students come to campus and many of them want to get a degree from our institutions and they want to succeed. But unfortunately, when sometimes they feel that success is very hard to come by, they might need a little bit of extra help in order to succeed. And that's when they turn to academic dishonesty. Sometimes success is different for different students. Success might be getting the A, having that 4.0. Sometimes success is maintaining a certain GPA just so they can retain their financial aid. Sometimes success is just simply passing the class. So we can't always define exactly what success is for that student, but that level of success that student has set forth, that's what they're trying to obtain. And that's what they are sometimes turning to academic dishonesty in order to obtain that level of what they view as success. Now, peer pressure does again influence students, like I mentioned before. Either they're seeing everyone else doing it, so they might as well do it. Maybe nobody is getting caught, and so they just want to go ahead and do it. Or they want to be successful in comparison to others. This is what I'm hearing a lot of my students have told me in cases that have come out. They said, well, I was really struggling in the class. I was seeing other students be very successful because they were cheating. And so I felt I had to do that. I had to cheat to level the playing field in that specific class. Some students feel the material is just very trivial or irrelevant, and they don't want to put the time into work with the others and with those classes. And so that's our time that we can teach them exactly, even though this might not be a class that is a requirement for your major, or maybe it's not something you're going to be doing in the future, what is the relevance of that material? And then other students, as I've again personally heard, many of them will say the work is too hard, it's too much, the faculty is unreasonable. And while this is definitely not a valid reason to be dishonest, the students feel that that's the only way they can be successful as they turn to academic dishonesty. Some of our students simply have poor time management skills to complete their assignments, to study for tests. They wait until the last minute and they realize they can't do it in the time they still have allotted. And so they turn to academic dishonesty. And then lastly, some students cheat just simply because of the lack of the culture of academic integrity. They don't know the rules. They don't know the expectations. They don't know what is expected of them to do, what to do, or what not to do. Next slide. So we think about those things about why students don't cheat, but let's also look at the reasons why they do cheat. Let's go for the next slide. Oh, sorry, go back one. Oh, okay, there we go. Sorry, I was confused on my slides for a second. So why they do not cheat. One is the peer culture doesn't cheat. Again, I've talked about peer culture several times, and that societal culture and the culture of academic integrity. So if the peer culture does not cheat, students will also be less likely to do so. A good number of our students do come to campus with a high level of morals and values. They have self-respect. They value education. They have a commitment to learning. That is how they were raised. And they bring their background to the institution. And so we know that those students are going to continue to have that high level of morals and values. Students who think they will be caught and those who know that there will be consequences for dishonesty are also less likely to cheat. So we can take this idea and make sure that we understand that it's important to talk about the policies we have on our campus and have faculty follow those processes. Because if a student knows that something's going to occur, if they were to be academically dishonest, they're less likely to do that. Even if they don't have the morals and values inside and innate in them yet, they're still developing those. They don't want to get caught. They don't want to get in trouble, and therefore they will not be academically dishonest. The next slide, please. So this is great timing for this webinar because actually last week, the International Center for Academic Integrity released our 3rd edition of the Fundamental Values for Academic Integrity. Both James and I had the privilege to work on this project for the past several months. And I bring this up because I wanted to make sure you are all aware of this document and the 6 values of academic integrity. So the International Center of Academic Integrity feels that these are the 6 values of integrity, and it is important for institutions to realize them and talk about them and really live them out to have that culture of academic integrity. So it's those 6 values are honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. And these are the ones that need to be discussed, implemented, and seen across campuses from students all the way through administration. Now, the very first version of the fundamental values only had 5 values of academic integrity. Courage was added during the 2nd edition because there was thought of that all these people who want to have these other values of academic integrity, they must have courage to embrace them, the courage to stand up, to talk about integrity, to hold each other accountable. And so we as people who work in academics know that the goals of teaching, learning, research, and service can really only be accomplished in ethical environments. So these values are the big picture of that background of culture of academic integrity. I encourage you to really review this document online, to read of examples on why these values are so important and really how they can be lived out by students, faculty, and administration, and also of your institution as a whole. Our communities must invoke them, regularly inviting staff, students, faculty, and administrators to consider and discuss the role of ethical values and their ability to inform and improve aspects of life on and off campus. And so when our society's institutions are infused with integrity, they do create a stronger civic culture as a whole. Now, we'll put in a little plug right here that ICAI is going to be having a much larger discussion on these values, especially with the new publication of the 3rd edition at our upcoming virtual annual conference, which will be held the 1st week of March. So I invite everybody to attend. We are welcoming anybody that normally might not attend our annual conference, but faculty, staff, administration, you're definitely welcome to attend. You can contact us after this webinar, James or myself, to get more information about that conference if you wanted to continue discussion about academic integrity. Next slide, please. So as we think about creating a culture, this is again a big picture thought, one that will definitely not occur overnight. But the first idea is to really embrace is that switch to a learning paradigm rather than an instructional paradigm. What will really support our students' mastery of the subject, or are they just simply memorizing information? The policies and procedures must be discussed across the campus. They also must be very understandable. People need to understand, what does it say in that policy? There should be a decreased fear of retaliation. So faculty must not fear for low teaching evaluations because they hold students accountable. All areas of the curriculum need to have discussions about ethic, moral decision-making, and academic dishonesty. And lastly, it is the responsibility for the faculty, staff, and administration to model the behaviors that we want seen in our students, just as our mentors did for us. And that goes back to those fundamental values. And we can see in those fundamental values how institutions, administrators, and faculty can really model those 6 values. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joseph to examine a little bit more of the faculty perspective.
Okay, thank you, Camilla. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Let's see, Liz, if we can go to the next slide, please, that'd be great. So, let me begin with just saying that on my campus, generally, I am the first person who's going to hear from a faculty member when something occurs in their course. And so I wanted to provide, some talking points to you, things that you may or may not have heard from your faculty. And I think also reflexively, they work back as great kind of points for faculty to remember as you carry out your semester and make your way through bringing this issue to the forefront. So I've called this, the 5 things faculty want you to know about managing AI issues, academic integrity issues. Obviously, this last year has been a very difficult year for all of our institutions in bringing this topic to the forefront and underlining it. It's presented challenges we've frankly have never seen before. And so I thought it might be helpful now to kind of refocus on some things that your faculty want you to know about their experience of, fighting the good fight. So, from prevention to accountability, doing this, in other words, making integrity part of what we do in higher education, it takes time. And so let your faculty know, if you're in a position of leadership, let them know that you see that time and that you value the time that they put into that, whether or not it's creating, creative assessments, new assessments, even if it comes down to, even if it's just a matter of you see the time they're putting into talking with their students about this issue, or the efforts that go into holding a student accountable when things go awry. Let them know that you value that time that they're committing to it. The second part here is helping your faculty understand your institution's process for managing academic integrity or academic misconduct incidents. As a former faculty member, I can tell you that one of the most, challenging concerns, one of the things that would dissuade me as a faculty member is the time commitment I would have to put into, managing an incident once I realized it had occurred. And sometimes that can, push them away from handling it the appropriate way. I think also many faculty members don't really know about a process at the institution until they have to go through it. So I think doing a little bit of front end loading there, where you help them understand that there is a process, what it entails, and give them a general sense of the time commitment that will have to play into managing that incident, really allows, number one, to make sure that we're following your university's guidelines, that you're participating in this culture of integrity that Camilla talked about just a moment ago, but also that you're not leaving cases or situations unresolved. That would be one of the last things we would want to do. So helping your faculty understand, it might be as simple as just inviting someone to a department meeting, right, or a college meeting, and having them explain kind of what it looks like. And so your faculty members can really get a sense of what they will need to do once that incident occurs. Now, this year, obviously, between CHEG and proctoring, your faculty kind of feel like they are in an arms race. Help them see other ways of managing. So in other words, what we want to do is we want to prevent the idea of an all or nothing dialectic, right? We want to prevent this situation where they feel like they either have to be constantly knocking down items on CHEG or these other, and by the way, I'm going to use CHEG as a shorthand for all of the other homework helper sites that we know exist, or all of the other capabilities that we know are disrupting our classroom learning right now. Let them know that it isn't an all or nothing situation, especially when it comes to proctoring. We're going to talk about proctoring in just a moment, but help them understand that there is a middle ground. There is a right for them fit for managing these issues, and that they're really not just caught in the middle. That they do have a tremendous ability to hold students accountable, to put this information in front of students, to make it a teaching moment, a learning moment for their students that doesn't involve fighting a technological arms race. They also need to know that you have their back. And what I mean by that is that there's institutional support for you holding students accountable, that there's institutional support for you putting this prevention education on the forefront. When incidents occur, I think the faculty are a little concerned that they're going to not only put all of this time and energy into managing that incident, but that ultimately all of that could be eroded by just the change of the wind at the institution, or the desire to avoid headwinds by department leadership or college leadership. That's very rare. I think we can all we can all admit that our institutions are very supportive of this particular value, but it does happen enough where a faculty, because things get complicated or there's some sort of pushback, that those stories kind of stick around. So I think that just communicating to your faculty, look, this is a value that we hold, and we want you to do the things that you do to make this, bring this to the forefront. We have your back. we're going to support you. We're going to, if that means something as simple as we're going to support the grading penalty that you have decided on as a department, or it may be just a more general statement of support. Those things matter to our faculty. And the last thing I would say about from the faculty perspective is kind of an uncertainty of where to begin, where to enter this conversation. I think one of the common conversations we hear at the ICAI conference among our faculty, it can range between I start from square one, or they should already know this when they come in. And I think that obviously we want to find a right fit for faculty in their particular courses and what levels they're teaching at their institution. But I also think that giving your faculty permission to teach academic integrity from square one is really valuable. And the story that I'm reminded of here, just to share a bit. So my son is 10 and he plays flag football about every fall, and I get roped into coaching it pretty often. And I remember there was a game in the last fall, where it was in the middle of the game and we were playing defense. And one of the other coaches on the team during a timeout told the boy who was closest to the sideline, and he said, I'm going to read you what I remember he said. He said, Drew, he's releasing to the flat, drop back in soft coverage, but watch his route, carry him to the middle. Don't forget, you have the safety's help if it's a post. And I watched the young man who was 10 in 5th grade have this look of just utter unknowing. And I just stopped and I said, Drew, do you understand what he means? And he just kind of smiled and was like, no. And that was a really important learning moment for me, because we get really used to the idea that the students that we're working with come in with some knowledge about this. And in some cases that is true. And in some cases it certainly is not. And so I think giving your faculty the permission to bring things down to the level that they believe is the entry level of this issue, and to start from that only is going to provide an important level of support for their classes. Okay, Liz, if we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to begin the conversation about e-proctoring. E-proctoring, obviously, this has been a controversial moment for proctoring in higher education. We have seen an expansion of products and also the capabilities of the products we already knew. And so just to kind of sit with that in the moment and to acknowledge that this is not we don't have any particular directive that we would give you today, because this is obviously a very controversial moment. And, part of it is trying to figure out what works best for your institution and your assessment structure at your institution. And so again, we want to kind of move away from this. It seems like there is a little bit of a conversation happening out in the field that's really kind of all or nothing, right? We're all the way in. We're completely, doing this kind of arms race with proctoring versus cheating, or we're not doing anything because of our moral objections to the complications that e-proctoring has brought to the fore. So what I would suggest is that we kind of move that conversation to right fit. The right fit for your institution. Obviously, you all come from very different kinds of institutions with very different kind of methods, and also just value systems. The way that you have your own perspective for how things should be done at your institution. A small liberal arts college might have a very different approach to e-proctoring than an engineering college. And so, I'm thinking of those terms. And so if we move this conversation to right fit, that also translates to your faculty. And so we kind of put this back into the context of faculty perspectives. Helping your faculty understand what their options are at your institution is incredibly valuable in this moment. In this moment, frankly, if they believe that they have to make a choice between the proctoring service that's going to make their students completely uncomfortable and might be hurting their learning, that they will not do that. They will not select that, right? And so then we get into some very damaging kind of situations where there's no proctoring whatsoever. And I don't know if many of you have experienced this, but we've noticed at our institution a sense of when there isn't any kind of communication happening to students about what those testing expectations are, those examination expectations, there's a bit of a Wild West atmosphere that occurs. And students seem to be misunderstanding the idea of open book, open notes for that particular kind of exam means open internet, right? Open everything. And then they find out too late that that's of course not the case. So what I would suggest is connecting your faculty with a proctoring expertise on your campus, right? And define what's right for their assessments. Some courses are going to be quite different than others. And so having that conversation, encouraging to have that conversation is incredibly valuable. And so, final thought on e-proctoring, I think, what it comes down to is, what are we communicating with our examination expectations? And I'd want you to encourage your faculty, and if you are faculty, to be thinking about what are you communicating when you tell students that there are no specific expectations for an exam that you've assigned, or if you are sending them to the most locked down version of any kind of proctoring service. And I think understanding what that might feel like and be translated to on their end would really kind of helps you find the best fit for your course. Okay, so now I'm gonna now switch over and pass off to James.
Excellent, thank you. What I want to do is to several of you, I see lots of questions in the chat. In this section, we'll answer several of those. I'll spend about 15 minutes to go through some slides. And what I want to do is give you some very concrete strategies that can be employed. Before I do that, where I come from is that I've been at 4 different institutions leading academic integrity initiatives for the past 16 years. And I've done it at various levels within the organization. So now I'll talk about it a little bit from that hands-on, on the ground level, and then where I sit now as a vice provost. Now, to say that though, a caveat to our presentation is that really the true promotion of academic integrity involves a coordinated conversation. And that conversation can happen anywhere. And we'll present strategies to you today, but the most successful approach depends on your campus culture. So I'll give you a host of current strategies from the literature, as well as some concrete steps that you can take. So next slide. So in the mid-90s, there was this conversation about an honor code versus a no honor code that I won't get into. But what we found is that people began to say, if you have an honor code, you can promote this culture of academic integrity, and that you had to have an honor code. But the research showed that that actually wasn't the case. And I'm a big proponent of honor codes. I think that they're important. They'll have these elements that I'll discuss with you. But here's what really matters in creating a culture of academic integrity. Number one is that academic integrity has to be high on the campus's agenda. So integrity does. And that means, does the provost, does the president, do people in senior leadership roles mention integrity? Do they mention honesty? Do they mention academic integrity? There has to be significant involvement and support from faculty. You see, faculty are the heart and souls of what makes an academic integrity system and culture work. And so there has to be significant support from faculty. There has to be significant involvement and support from students. It goes back to what Camilla mentioned earlier when we talk about this social norming and the campus environment and what are my peers doing. And so really cultivating this culture requires a systems approach. So next slide. So to do that, it has to be approached from what we consider 3 ways. The first is the ethos, and that's the value system of the institution. And then what resources do you provide to the campus community to educate students? And then how are your policies and procedures? And I'll talk about each of those. Next slide. So next slide. So the ethos is this idea that academic integrity should be something that's revered, honored, and upheld on campus. And the way you do that is to ensure that everyone on the campus community demonstrates or communicates a personal commitment to academic integrity. Faculty can do this by discussing why integrity and honesty is important to them. Administrators can do this by finding ways to mention integrity and honesty. But here's what I want to stress, that the promotion of academic integrity and thinking about honesty and communicating the values of honesty and integrity is much more important than stopping cheating. Because what we know is that the research tells us that 20% of our students will cheat no matter what we do, 20% will not cheat no matter what we do, and 60%, whether or not they engage in academic dishonesty, really depends on the culture of the institution. So when we begin to promote a culture of honesty and integrity, that's going to reduce the academic dishonesty that occurs. Next slide. So the next point is this idea of, okay, so we know that the message, it has to be honor, integrity, and why we hold these values as an institution. But then how do we actually infuse those values into the campus community? How do we do it? How do we infuse it into the culture? And that goes with the collaborative outreach programming in education. Next slide. So the very first thing, one of the very first things that you can do and think about is, and I tried to put in some easy strategies. And one is that an annual email that goes to students from a senior leader that talks about the values of academic integrity and where students might find resources. There should be an annual email that goes to faculty. This could be at the beginning of the semester or at the end of the semester. But in that annual email that you send to faculty, and I'll give you an example in a second, you should also include some syllabi guidelines and suggestions that includes links to promoting academic integrity. If you have a required academic integrity statement, a statement. I think it's very important that when you send these guidelines out, that you may list some strategies that faculty might employ to help prevent academic dishonesty. You may also point to some resources that's available to faculty. And here's a big one that I found very successful, and it doesn't take a lot of time, is that you may also include some recommended text that the faculty might send to their students and personalize it after they personalize it a little bit about what integrity means in their courses. Next slide. So I just put on the slide very quickly an example of the provost at the University of Memphis. He did exactly what I just described. And he sent it out to the faculty at the end of the fall semester so that they could consider some of the tips and strategies to employ as they were making up their spring semester classes. He also mentions a workshop that I'll talk about in a second that we offer to faculty to provide them with some training early on, and we're able to do it with a very small staff. So next slide. The next thing that we want to encourage you to do, though, is as you're having these conversations and as you're thinking about what are some things that I can encourage our students, our faculty to think about, you want to encourage faculty to consider the questions that Bill Taylor shared. And that's this idea of how do we make students feel less invisible? In the work that I do with enrollment, and student success initiatives, one of the things that stands out to me that in this era, what we're dealing with right now in the current situation, is absolutely critical that students feel engaged, that they don't feel invisible. So pose some of these questions to the faculty as things that they can think about to really, as they shape their courses and as they're communicating with their students, to really promote this culture of academic integrity. Next slide. You can do something that I call virtual know the code sessions. In the slides before this, where the provost sent out a message to the faculty, one of the things that he mentioned was something that we call know the code sessions. So many of you, as you sit in senior roles and you're working, you often hear from whether it's your conduct offices or your people who do academic integrity. Typically, they're not staffed to do a lot of education and outreach. So one of the things that I've implemented on multiple campuses and found to be very helpful is that at the beginning of the semester, we offer a session for faculty, we offer 3 sessions, same content is covered, but we're offering them at 3 different times across a week so that faculty can choose which session they go to. And during these sessions, we talk about what constitutes academic integrity at the institution, strategies that they can employ to promote academic integrity, and then what is the university's academic integrity process. We also offer those same sessions for students the second week of classes. We do it again for 3 days. We usually do it from 5 o'clock to 6:30, and we offer the same session multiple days. And we say to faculty, please encourage your students to attend one of these sessions. And on the screen, what you see is 3 of my colleagues at the University of Memphis, 2 students, and one of our directors of student conduct is actually the Associate Dean and Director of Student Conduct. And what we do is they lead a session that talks about, here's how students, you can avoid academic misconduct. Here's some things that you can do so that you don't engage in academic dishonesty. And what we do is we focus on student success strategies, because one of the things that the literature tells us is that one of the big reasons why students engage in academic dishonesty is because they have poor time management and they're not employing those strategies that's conducive to learning. I found the virtual know the code sessions are very helpful in that regard. Next slide. If you don't have an academic integrity and student success learning module, I would encourage you to work with your team, whether it's your Student Success Center or others, to develop an academic integrity and student success learning module. I listed some of the things that that module could cover. Virginia Tech has a very strong, robust academic integrity, student success online learning module. Many faculty will put this in their syllabi and encourage students to complete the module to ensure that they understand academic integrity. Next slide. You also want to think about ways that you can, that doesn't take up a lot of time, but you can use to promote a culture of integrity and honesty. You may do that through an academic integrity week, where maybe the focus is not academic integrity, maybe it's ethics. And many times colleges and schools of business will do integrity weeks, but you want to do a week or a day where you really talk about integrity and honesty, where you encourage your staffs to do that. It's also important, the International Center for Academic Integrity has a host of webinars that we offer. And if you can send those links out to people on campus, we do a day to end contract cheating every October in the fall. So in the fall and October, that might be helpful. And if you can provide financial resources to attend an academic integrity conference for people, for students and faculty and staff, it's important to do that. Next slide. But here's the main point. The main point is that if you're sitting in an administrative role or leadership role on the campus, when you think about academic integrity, I want to encourage you to encourage the people who are working on academic integrity initiatives to think about how they may partner with others on campus that work on issues of student success. Maybe it's academic advisors. How do you partner with teaching and learning centers? How do you encourage discussion amongst academic departments? How do you engage with undergraduate research, the Career Center, ethics? The idea is that the true promotion of academic integrity can't be done in isolation. And so in the seat that I sit in, whenever people come to me and they're talking about academic integrity, I always say, you know, that's a good idea. Is the Student Success Center doing some programming that you could incorporate academic integrity with? What about our Center for Teaching and Learning? And the idea is to encourage and promote campus collaboration. Next slide. So the last piece that I'll talk about is this idea of the policies and the procedures. So we have the ethos. It is, we want to promote this culture of honesty and integrity. That's what we talk about. It's more important than talking about stopping cheating. And then we want to provide and encourage facilitation and engagement for outreach and programming. But the next piece is the policies and procedures. So next slide. Some of the things that I think is important when we think about the policies and procedures that the faculty and students should have a place in the process, that the rules should be clearly published, but don't just publish, here's what cheating means, here's what constitutes plagiarism. It's important to include examples of what cheating or plagiarism or complicity might be. If you're looking for a resource that has some great examples, you can go to Mississippi State University's Honor Code Office. They have some great examples. Texas A&M have great examples in their document, and Virginia Tech has some awesome examples in their document as well. You want to clearly publish the rules and expectations, and it's important that we consider our academic integrity processes as learning-centered processes. So when you look at your process and you think about it, you want to think, what are we doing to make sure that when a student has a misstep or they engage in academic dishonesty, that the process is a learning-centered process? You also have to ensure that due process is followed and fundamental fairness is followed, and that cases are resolved in a timely manner. Next slide. I want to talk about all the types of adjudication models, but there are 2 points that I want to highlight. Point number 1 is that when you're considering how cases of academic dishonesty are adjudicated, it's important to remember that not all cases of academic misconduct should or need to be resolved through a hearing panel. So if you have a process or a policy that requires all cases to be resolved and adjudicated through a hearing panel, I want to encourage you to reconsider that and to engage the campus community in a conversation to say, do all of our cases require a hearing panel? The second thing that I want to encourage you to reconsider is that if you have an adjudication process that follows the flow of a grade appeal, where the faculty member writes a letter to the student saying, you have been charged with X, Y, and Z. And then if the student doesn't agree with what the faculty member is saying, then they go to the department head, and then they go to the dean, and they continue up that academic chain. I'd encourage you to reconsider that as well. I won't go into all the details on adjudication types and models, but there are more learning-centered models that will resolve cases in a timely manner and will ensure greater consistency and equity across the sanctions that students receive. Next slide. I want to encourage you to carefully consider the sanctions that you provide. You can go ahead and bullet these next few points out, please. So as I talk about sanctions, there is what I believe a COVID-19 sort of error in response that we have to think about. It is true that many of our students, they are not used to or not accustomed to engaging and learning in the online environment. And many of our faculty are not used to teaching in the online environment. And so in this time period, it's important that when we're assigning sanctions, that we consider whether or not it's a situation where a student didn't understand what constituted academic misconduct. Maybe they did understand what constituted academic misconduct. And we just have to be thoughtful and student-centered and learning-centered in our response during the COVID-19 era. But the other thing that I want to encourage you to consider as things get back to normal is, do your sanctions serve as a deterrent to academic misconduct? Do your sanctions, are they learning centered? Do they differentiate from this idea of academic misconduct versus academic deference? And really engage and think about the sanctioning and say, does it actually relate to why a student committed academic dishonesty? So if a student plagiarizes and I fail the student on the assignment for plagiarizing, but I don't put them through an academic integrity education seminar, or I don't educate them on plagiarism, have I really helped them? Next slide, please. One of the things, regardless of what you do in terms of your sanctioning, I think it's important that it has an academic integrity component to it, and you can develop in-house trainings for students who are found responsible for academic dishonesty. I also think that it's important to consider the overall impact of our sanctions, whether or not a sanction serves as a deterrent. So if a student gets a 0 on the assignment, then does that really deter a student from committing academic misconduct, right? So what are the appropriate responses? And then do we have an educational or restorative piece to it? Next slide. Next slide. The last 2 slides, the last 3 slides that I'll mention is this idea that it's important to embrace unhappy faculty members. And I encourage people who are in senior roles is that when you do have the opportunity to talk to a faculty member who has had a bad experience, to listen, but encourage the people who are working on the ground and working directly with academic integrity to include in their response ways that they can get feedback from the faculty. It may be a process and procedure survey where at the end of every case, you send out this survey to get feedback from faculty and students who went through the process. And the number one thing that always works is that if you have a faculty member who is upset and they think the process is broken, encourage them to serve on to be a panel member to help you fix their process. And that always works. But welcome feedback. You can't make everyone happy, but you can listen. Next slide. Continuously assess your campus culture. You don't have to do all of these things. I'm presenting you with a lot of strategies, but consider the Academic Integrity Survey. We offer campus consulting in the International Center for Academic Integrity, where we do a deep dive in some of the things that I've just glossed over. You may do a process and procedure survey. You may want to look to see when your students commit academic dishonesty and they're sanctioned, is that a deterrent? Are they less likely to commit academic dishonesty again? And then also just evaluate the effectiveness of your overall sanctioning. Next slide. So here's the key points. I gave a lot of information and we wanted to leave time for questions. So I want to end with these key points. Number 1 is that your commitment matters. If you're in a leadership role on the campus, if you talk about integrity, if you talk about honesty, even if it's not academic integrity, you find ways to mention those in speeches, then that will help create this culture of academic integrity. Number 2, if you utilize annual updates, so it doesn't have to be a lot, but at the beginning of the semester or at the end of the semester or both, there should be a letter that goes out to the faculty and students about integrity and honesty. The Honor the Code sessions that I mentioned earlier, they're easy. You can do those. It doesn't take up a lot of time. It allows students to have a better understanding of the process, because oftentimes we hear students say, I don't like the process and I don't think this should be cheating, or I don't think this should be plagiarism. And I love it when students say that, because we get a chance to engage them in a learning experience. You want to ensure that there's academic integrity resources on your website or on a website on the campus. Consider publishing academic integrity data. I know that a lot of times people get a little bit concerned about this, but I think it's important to publish aggregate data on maybe case outcomes, on sanctioning, because what it does is it allows people on your campus to know that when academic misconduct does occur, that the institution is taking action. You want to provide academic integrity initiatives and updates to the campus leadership when you can, to the provost, to the president, to the board. And let me caution you as my last slide, that if you do the things that we've talked about, that the number of cases of academic misconduct will increase. And I know that from working on 4 different campuses and either leading or being involved in some way with academic integrity initiatives. The number of cases are going to increase, but it's not because more cheating is occurring, but it's because there's a greater awareness of academic integrity on the campus, and people are supportive, and the faculty are actually reporting cases now. And when that happens, we have a unique opportunity to ensure that our process is learning centered. And when I say learning centered, that might mean sometimes that if you engage in academic misconduct, you can't be a member of our community for a time period. It may mean that you no longer can be a member of our community. But it also may mean that I'm going to sanction you, but then I need to add in an educational restorative piece so that you can know how to avoid future violations. It also may mean for the faculty that we have a conversation about our syllabi and we ask the question, how can we better educate students on what the expectations are? So those are the slides that we had, and we want to open it up for questions. And I know that there's some questions in the chat as well. So we'll open the floor for some questions. Go ahead.
Well, thank you all for your presentation today. So we've received lots of questions so far, but feel free to keep submitting questions. So let's see. So a question from Archie Holmes at the University of Texas System. Has there been work research showing any of the benefits to thinking about academic integrity as a skill to be developed and link it to the success that one can expect in their personal and professional lives after graduation by demonstrating academic integrity? I'm not convinced that tying to ethical moral behavior is going to be enough.
You know, that's, Camilla, do you want to take that or you want me to take that?
Well, I mean, I was going to start off, but then I can hand it over. I was going to make a couple comments. Okay. We'll probably jump back and forth. My first initial thought with that is it's one of the things that we are trying to do in some of our academic integrity programs in terms of kind of remediation, and but I think it can be done in other places too. But it's thinking about students about, yes, what are they planning on doing? So it's very easy, especially in an engineering field, to say, okay, if you do some of these actions, if you take a shortcut, if you take an easy way out, people's lives are at stakes in the engineering field. And so that's one of the things that I know I try to work with my students, saying that this is the idea of integrity is not just while they're at Kansas State University, it's for their entire lifetime, and really focusing on the things that they're very interested in. So very similar to the reason why students might cheat in the first place, that they're not interested in the matter. They feel it's trivial, it's irrelevant. Well, finding something that is relevant, yet still has those guiding principles of, you know, we're trying to make the world a better place. I know that sounds kind of very large and a goal, but it's the idea that, okay, if our students are making these decisions and good decisions now, then that will help them in the future. And if we can give them those examples. I mean, one of the assignments we often have our students do in the class that we teach is they have to go and interview people who are there going to be in the whatever profession they are going into, to talk about what are the ethical and what are the challenges and what are the decisions that they have to make on a daily basis, just so they see exactly what is happening in their profession. So we're tying it back to that professional side. So I don't know exactly if that's what the question was going at, but James, I think you have a couple things to add there too.
Well, yeah, and I would say one of the things that we encourage when we do seminars for faculty on how to reduce academic dishonesty is to have this conversation about professional codes of ethics and to connect it beyond what's happening in the classroom. And that's what I was getting at when earlier I mentioned about engaging the Career Center and talking about ethics, because really to create this culture, it can't just be academic integrity. It has to be, how do we create a community of trust? And then how does that impact you when you go out into the workforce? The last thing I will brag on Camilla in Kansas State, because she won't do it, so I'll do it for her, is that one of the pieces that's really important about their educational program is that they talk about the campus community. So here are the sort of the skills that you need, right? Here's what constitutes academic dishonesty. Here's how you avoid it. But the other piece that makes their program so successful is that they also talk about, here's why integrity is important to you when you leave the campus community. Virginia Tech's educational seminar and program, as well as Mississippi State's program, they have a really good piece that Gary Pavella offers, and it talks about careers, and they actually apply integrity and honesty to career aspirations and to real life scenarios. And it really goes beyond this idea of just what occurs in the classroom.
Yeah, and also since the question asked about the research, I would just point out that, you know, really the kind of foundational research that Gary Pavella and Don McCabe did, you know, a lot of that came out of, you know, the business world, right? And particularly these colleges of business that were concerned about what they were hearing from their industry partners. And, you know, then it was kind of a backward facing of like, well, what are we preparing our students to do when they go through these degree programs and they emerge as professionals. So if you're looking for kind of a research grounding on that particular question, I just would point you back to, you know, Pavella and McCabe.
I'll jump in on one of the questions that came forward, and I can't find it exactly, but it was, so I'll kind of paraphrase what I can recall of it. But I was asking about when do we start talking about academic integrity and looking at the high schools? And I think this is definitely an untapped resource for many of us in higher education, is to start going to the high schools. I've been working actually with an individual in Turkey, and he is overseeing a research project dissertation of another individual in Turkey who is looking at academic integrity in the high schools all around Turkey. And it's pretty amazing to see the advances that other countries are doing. And Turkey is not the only one. Australia is doing a lot with high schools as well. And so it's it's almost saddening that we are not, because that is something that I think that in the United States in particular, we could reach out much more to high schools. I know that previously, I know myself and other academic integrity offices have gone out and done short little seminars for high schools, maybe in their English classes, talking about plagiarism. But I know, again, when I talk to my students, even my graduate students outside of the academic integrity field, we're talking about that development of the individual, development of the student. So I tell them stories about how I'm talking with my children, saying, you know, you need to share on the playground. You can't just steal a ball from somebody else. You can't just, so it then builds up in their education that you can't just steal somebody else's work. You have to ask, you have to give permission. And so it's the idea of starting at a young age of these ideas of being helpful, asking, and being gracious, and that build up. But definitely, we do need to increase our work with our high schools. And I'm really hoping that the Turkish survey for the high schools, it is in English right now. And so I'm hoping they will allow us to actually be able to start use that to do some surveying of our own high schools. And we can figure out how we can do that with the wide variety of school districts and school boards, and between public schools and private schools. But that is definitely an untapped resource. So I would encourage you to work, if you have connections with your school boards, to somehow work with them, because they are your future students. And it is going to be much more beneficial if they can begin that process and know what they're coming into in higher education.
And just to jump on,
we had a question about policies. So the various types of policies. One, it looks like Beth wrote that AI violations is a drain on faculty time and resources. For example, it can affect whether a faculty member where a research university is able to meet the highest bar of research and keep their jobs? Have you seen AI policies that are good examples of efficient but fair processes? So yes, and one of the things that I did is I put in the chat some examples of institutions that in my experiences have very sound and solid policies. But here's the overarching piece that I'll encourage you to consider. Number one is that if all your cases of academic misconduct have to go through a hearing panel, then you probably want to reconsider that, because when that happens, it makes the time to resolve cases way, way longer. So you may consider that. And if you're an institution that is an institution that has to have very strong student involvement, then you may take a look at Virginia Tech's policy. But if you're an institution that needs very strong faculty involvement, and the faculty, they're used to handling cases of academic misconduct very similar to a grade appeal, then you might take a look at Texas A&M or Mississippi State's policy, because they do a good balance of that. And then if you're at an institution that has very deep concerns about this idea of not undue pressure being placed on students and sort of fairness, you might look at Texas Tech or the University of Georgia's policy. And these are things that the International Center for Academic Integrity, we can help you do, because it really depends on the campus culture. There are some fundamental tenets that we know work, but what we can help you do is evaluate your campus community and culture to determine what's the best approach.
So I think we have time for about one or maybe two more questions. Is there one that's particularly calling to you?
I'll make one comment that deals with a lot of the questions. There's several questions about what do we do when, and that goes back to knowing the policy. That's ICAI kind of has a stance that we will help you in analyzing and reviewing what your current culture is and help you figure out what policy might be best or what might we adjust it. But there's not one set policy that's going to be perfect for everything. And so there's a lot of these questions that say, well, what happens when, or how should we do this? And it really depends on your policy. So I know that's not the answer that many of you wanted to hear, but it's going back and learning that.
And Camilla, and also like using I don't want to say using common sense, right? But sometimes we take these situations so personally that if we can really think through what our policies are and then how we can use it as a teaching moment. So one person put in the chat that someone had asked them to write a paper for them, and the student told the instructor but hasn't revealed the name. Then if you have a policy that doesn't require the student to report and the student doesn't want to report, then it may be appropriate to have a conversation with the students in the course, all of the students, about what's appropriate collaboration and what's not appropriate collaboration without calling anyone out. But the idea is that many of these issues are very complex, but I find that when we approach them from a student-centered, compassionate lens, and many of you sit in vice provost roles and dean's roles, and so you know the importance of being able to resolve conflict. And when we look at it through these issues, it makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because we, one of the things that our institutions all have in common, and also with their Reinvention Collaborative, is a commitment to equity. I think, balancing our academic integrity policies and education with equity is incredibly important for a university-wide response and even, a national response. The problem with doing some of the planning and the prevention education that a lot of institutions do is that, they trend heavily towards research-based courses, which generally trend towards upper division courses. I'm thinking particularly about the invitations I've gotten from area high schools are almost exclusively from IB programs. And while that's great, you think about the vast majority of our students come from programs that are not IB, and they still need to hear this information. And if you're not reaching those students, and especially once they hit your campus, I think that you need to be thinking more intently about how you're providing that message to all of our students and all the students who could be impacted.
Well, we are out of time, so thank you to Dr. Roberts, Dr. Brown, and Dr. Orr for sharing with us today. We'll post this recording at reinventioncollaborative.org/recordings. It'll be a couple days so that we have a chance to get it captioned. We'll also send out an email to everyone who registered so that you can know when that recording is up and also use that at your institutions and share with any colleagues who you think might be interested. We have all of our previous town hall recordings available at that website as well. And so we've had a great series of speakers on a variety of different topics, so check those out. So thank you again to our presenters, and I hope everyone stays warm as many of us are experiencing very cold weather. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.